What is Grave of the Fireflies? At a distance, Grave of the Fireflies is a gut-wrenching film about what it was like to live in Japan as a civilian during the US bombings of World War II. But if you slightly shift your lens, you'll realize Grave of the Fireflies gives us an eye-opening view of not only what was happening in Japan in 1945, but also what's happening in another part of the world in 2025. This film helps you build empathy and realize that the story of our main characters, Seita and Setsuko, was indeed a tragedy. But what a lot of people don't realize is how this tragedy is all too similar to Israel's genocide of the Palestinian people in Gaza in the current day. So how was Grave of the Fireflies able to paint such an accurate picture of what it was like to live through World War II Japan? And most importantly, how did Israel and the United States not learn from the tragedies of World War II? Why are these two countries so committed to the worst genocide in modern history? To get the answers, we have to take a look back to early 1900s Japan. On October 10th, 1930, in Kanagawa Prefecture, Akiyuki Nosaka was born. At the time of Akiyuki's birth, the world had no clue how much death and destruction would soon come. By the time this young boy became a teenager, he would live a life that you truly wouldn't wish upon your worst enemy. Shortly after birth, Akiyuki's biological mother had died, and he was adopted by his aunt and moved to Kobe City, Japan. In 1944, his aunt also adopted a second young girl named Keiko. Unfortunately, less than a year after this adoption, on June 5th, 1945, the US commenced the bombing of Kobe in World War II. This bombing was part of a set of strategic air raids on military targets, civilians, and population centers towards the final stages of the Pacific War. During this raid, Akiyuki lost both his home and his adoptive father to the firebombs. Akiyuki's foster mother suffered severe burns across her entire body and was immediately hospitalized. With no home and no one to take care of them anymore, Akiyuki and his sister Keiko were moved to Nishinomiya and taken into the care of a widow willing to take them on. What the two children didn't realize at the time was that World War II Japan was awful for all civilians. During this time, families were getting bombed daily, living off strict rations and severely lacking any forms of actual medical facilities. When they moved in, they did bring a large pack of provisions that their deceased father had buried for emergencies. However, it ran out quickly and they began to survive on rice, stolen vegetables, and food that Akiyuki could forage, like wild snails. Of course, this wasn't sustainable. Keiko unfortunately began to suffer from malnutrition, both from being unable to eat hard foods and because Akiyuki would often eat her portion of food. When looking back at this time in his life, Akiyuki described, "When I think of how my sister wasted away to skin and bones by a process of reverse development that eventually left her too weak to raise her head or even cry, how she died alone, and how there was nothing left of her but ash after she was cremated, I feel that I was too preoccupied with self-preservation. When I found myself in the hell of starvation, I ate her share of food." Now look, hearing a tragedy like this strikes deep in anyone's heart. But what may surprise you is that the tragedies that we're gonna go over currently occurring in Gaza are identical to this story, and some of the stories are even worse. Traumatized by the bombings he had already survived, anytime Akiyuki heard air raid sirens, he would take his sister and he would flee to a nearby bomb shelter. This led to the neighbors labeling him as a coward for running away instead of helping with the firefighting duties. Combine this negative attention from the neighbors and a squabble between their new foster parent, Akiyuki took him and his sister and permanently moved to the bomb shelter to live. The stay in the bomb shelter rapidly worsened Keiko's condition. Keiko stopped walking and reverted to crawling, too weak to even eat or cry. She eventually died in her sleep on August 21st of that same year. Now we're gonna fast forward to 1967, about 20 years after Akiyuki's sister's death. He wanted to right the wrongs he felt he had done in his younger life. He looked back on stealing her food, not helping with the firefighting duties of the air raid, and overall, what he felt was being a delinquent in his younger days. So Akiyuki decided to write the short story known as Grave of the Fireflies. This story is a semi-autobiographical retelling of his experiences with the firebombs and his sister Keiko, told through the lens of older brother Seita and younger sister Setsuko. Notably, the story shows Seita acting far more nobly than Akiyuki had himself. About 20 years later, this short story ended up on the desk of acclaimed filmmaker Isao Takahata. Takahata said he was compelled to make this film after being inspired by Seita's incredible character and his own experience with air raids in Okayama when he was growing up. But when this film was created, it wasn't like anything we had ever seen before. Grave of the Fireflies is in a class of its own when it comes to wartime films. The anti-war message resonates with the audience in a way that feels authentic and at the same time unforced. But sadly, the entire time I watched this film, I couldn't help but think that we as people didn't pick up on the lessons that this film was trying to teach us. I know this because what's happening in Gaza is much worse than war. It's genocide. War is defined as a state of armed conflict between different nations or states or different groups within a nation or state. Genocide is defined as the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. It involves acts like killing members of a group, causing them serious bodily or mental harm, deliberately inflicting conditions of life that would lead to physical destruction, imposing measures to prevent births within the group, and forcibly transferring members of that group to another group. The sad truth is that the story of Grave of the Fireflies is happening in Gaza today. But the real question is, why? Why is Israel so committed to the genocide in Gaza? And where did this conflict even originate from? Are the Palestinians in the wrong, or is it the state of Israel? And where do you, a citizen of the United States, play a role in all of this? This is Israel. This is Gaza. This is the West Bank. This is what they all look like on a map. This is King David. He and his son are two primary figures in the Jewish faith. They both helped establish Jerusalem, which is pretty much where Israel and Palestine are located today. This is Benjamin Netanyahu. He sucks. Believe it or not, this guy said this in a press conference before.
Hitler didn't want to exterminate the Jews at the time. He wanted to expel the Jews. And Haj Amin al-Husseini went to Hitler and said, if you expel them, they'll all come here. So what should I do with them? He asked. He said, burn them.
This is a clip of Donald Trump kissing his feet, pushing in his chair. This is Arthur Balfour. He served as the Prime Minister of the UK at the beginning of the 1900s. He sucks too. Not as much as the Ben guy, but it's definitely a close battle. This is the Nakba. This right here is too sad to talk about right now, so we'll get back to this later. This is Hamas, a Palestinian resistance group. Sadly, on October 7th, 2023, they launched an attack on Israel, killing around 1,200 people. Since October 7th, 53,655 Palestinians have been killed, totaling 62,839 lives on both sides. This needs to stop. Let's figure out how. Since this topic is so dense, it deserves its own hour-long video, this is just gonna be a quick history run-through. I'm just gonna speed through the perspectives of both sides in really the least biased way that I can. But before I start, I'm gonna be frank. I'm gonna sound biased when I'm going over the Palestinian perspective. It's because I am. And when you hear the horrific things that have happened on that side of the story, I think you might be too. But we'll get to that later. First off, the Israeli perspective. The conflict between these two sides dates back thousands of years. The central premise of the conflict really is just who controls the rightful ownership of the land. The land corresponds to where modern-day Israel is located, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. Now, there are other parts of small parts of Jordan, southern Lebanon, and southwestern Syria, but to avoid confusing you, we're just gonna focus on modern-day Israel, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. The Jewish people originated in this land around 1000 BCE with the kingdoms of David and Solomon. Jerusalem served as the capital and location of the first and second Jewish temples. During 70 CE, the Romans came and forcefully exiled the Jewish people from this land. But Jewish communities somehow maintained a continuous presence. Then began 2,000 years of diaspora, or otherwise known as dispersing or spreading people away from their original homeland. Throughout all of this, I'm going to try to throw up definitions on the screen just because this is just a huge topic And if you're like me and a newcomer to this subject like I was before, learning all of this at once can be confusing. So hopefully that just makes it a little bit easier. But the Jewish people still maintain cultural, religious, and emotional ties to their homeland for 2,000 years, even after being dispersed. The concept of Zionism emerged in the late 19th century as a response to persistent anti-Semitism in Europe. Anti-Semitism just meaning hostility or prejudice against Jewish people. Zionism is described as a movement aimed at establishing a national home for Jewish people through the colonization of Palestine. Palestine, which is pretty much just the land we described earlier, just to make that clear. This movement was elevated with the Balfour Declaration in 1917. The Balfour Declaration was a letter from British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour, this guy, to Lord Rothschild, a prominent figure in the British Jewish community, expressing British support for this declaration, holy cow, man. This declaration expressed British support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. It was a key event in the history of Zionism and is often considered a turning point in the Arab-Israeli conflict. Immediately after this declaration, the Jewish people settled in Palestine and transformed the land. They cleared out malaria-infested swamps, established agricultural settlements, and truly revitalized the land overall. Now, we're gonna fast forward 30 years, and the UN Partition Plan came into being. This plan aimed to create two independent states, one Jewish and one Arab, with Jerusalem under international administration. This plan was rejected by Palestinians and many Arab nations, but Israel was still able to declare its independence in 1948. Immediately after, they were attacked by the neighboring Arab nations, and constant battle have continued to ensue between them to this day.
Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free, free Palestine! Free, free, free Palestine!
From the river to the sea!
Palestine will be free!
From the river to the sea!
Palestinians are descendants of various peoples who have continuously inhabited the land for thousands of years. Arabs have been the majority population in Palestine since the 7th century. By the early 20th century, Palestinians have constituted over 90% of the population. European Zionist settlement represents a form of colonialism imposed without Palestinian consent. Colonialism meaning taking control of another territory, natural resources, and people by a foreign group, usually by force. To give you a simple example that most of us will understand, the Europeans settling in North America and kicking out of Native American peoples is widely considered a classic example of colonialism. Now, you remember that good old Balfour Declaration I talked about before? Yeah, Britain made that without consulting the native population that was currently living in that land. In 1922, the League of Nations established the British Mandate for Palestine. This mandate placed Britain in charge of administering Palestine with the primary goal of establishing a Jewish national home while ensuring all inhabitants' civil and religious rights. Thereafter, the Palestinians reasonably resisted what they saw as foreign colonization of their homeland. One of the most notable events for the Palestinians is the Nakba. This event refers to the mass displacement of Palestinians during Israel's establishment in 1947 through 1949. So, in simple terms, it describes the period when hundreds of thousands of Palestinians either fled or were expelled from their homes during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Around 700,000 Palestinians became refugees, and more than 400 Palestinian villages were either destroyed or completely depopulated. For Palestinians, the Nakba represents an ethnic cleansing that created the world's largest standing refugee crisis. The war that occurred in 1967 was another major turning point. This war led to the military occupation of the remaining Palestinian territories. And it should be noted, under international law, Israeli settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem are illegal. Since this war, Palestinians have lived under military rule with restricted rights and movement. Now, what this means is that Palestinians in the occupied territories face a different legal system from that of the Israeli settlers living in the same geographical area. This means courts with lower standards of evidence and higher conviction rates, while Israeli settlers are tried in Israel's civilian courts. This also means imprisonment without trial is legal. Homes are allowed to be demolished for lack of permits, and you are not allowed to organize or protest politically. On top of all of this, the Israeli settlers have also set up up a checkpoint system with about 140 outposts. This system makes living in the occupied territories mentally grueling. A trip that would take 15 minutes without checkpoints might take literally hours. When leaving your own house, people may be questioned about their destination and their purpose of going there, with the right to be denied access. The Palestinians have widely viewed the checkpoint system as a collective punishment that disrupts everyday life, humiliates ordinary people, and fragments their territory into disconnected areas. The most recent conflict started on October 7, 2023, when Hamas, a Palestinian resistance group, sadly attacked Israel and killed 1,200 people and took 250 hostages. All these acts of cruelty that I just stated are where you start to see the tragedies happening in Grave of the Fireflies are really happening in real life. And you may not realize it, but you have the power to make a difference. During World War II, by 1945, American submarines and aircrafts had destroyed approximately 90% of Japan's merchant fleet, making it extremely difficult to import food. This caused innocent men, women, and children to die of starvation and malnutrition, as we see in the very beginning scene of Grave of the Fireflies. In Gaza, Israel has blocked the entry of all humanitarian aid into Gaza. This includes fuel, 83% of the required food aid, medical supplies, water and sanitation equipment, and essential healthcare infrastructure like tents, hospital beds, sleeping bags, and more. These restrictions have worsened the humanitarian crisis, leading to widespread malnutrition, untreated injuries, and collapse of essential services. In Grave of the Fireflies, we see how the US had systematic bombings of schools, hospitals, and heavily populated areas. Israel's bombings have targeted doctors, nurses, teachers, reporters, journalists, and primarily women and children. Percentage-wise, according to Oxfam International, more women and children have been killed in Gaza by the Israeli military than any other recent conflict in a single year. The blocking of aid being used as a military tactic and the intentional targeting of civilian populations has been deemed such a violation of human rights that the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, this guy, has a warrant out for his arrest for International Criminal Court. Okay, so what can we do and what does this all mean? First off, we have to immediately question any person who tries to justify what Israel is doing with the claim,
I support Israel's ability to defend itself.
of course, Israel has the right to defend itself. No one's arguing that. What's happening in Gaza is obviously much more than that. No matter what side you're on, just like when watching Grave of the Fireflies, we can see that what's happening in that movie is awful, so what's happening in real life is by far worse. Let this movie be a guide and a reminder to tell people that these acts of cruelty and violence have no place in society, and they should not be only condemned, but also immediately ended. I stand by this. And as crazy as it may sound, no human deserves to starve to death. No human deserves to die by bombing. And just because this issue may be happening on the other side of the world, it does directly affect you. Just since the most recent conflict, America has sent $17.9 billion to Israel to help fund what has been deemed as an international war crime and genocide in Gaza. Since the start of the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts in 1946, when adjusting for inflation, America has provided over $158 billion in military aid to Israel. All of this military aid is funded directly through your tax dollars. So simply all you have to do, stop paying taxes. I'm joking. Don't do that. Don't say that I even told you to do that. Don't do that. But here is what you can do. Contact your local Congress member and call for an arms embargo on Israel. Israel would not be able to do a fraction of the harm that they have without direct help of the US weapons. If the people deciding to send these weapons feel enough pressure, they will have to stop eventually. Learn more about Gaza and lift Palestinian voices. If you feel well educated on the conflicts between Israel and the Palestinians after this video, well, you shouldn't. You honestly shouldn't. This video just covers the surface of the history between these two sides, and truly the only way to get informed is to read books on both sides and learn truly everything there is about the issue. Form your own basis of opinion when it comes to this conflict. I'll do my best to link the books for both sides in the description, and I'll try to even throw a few up on screen. You have the power to fight for injustices and make your voice heard. So start now.